Thank you, David. So good afternoon, everybody. Today's April 28th, 2026, and this is SEVA VentRounds. And today we're going to focus on a case that comes all the way from Mexico, and it's really nice to review some of the concepts that we now use. So we're going to focus on baseline support and some of the settings that we use. The first are disclosures. There's no endorsement of any mode, ventilator, manufacturer, whatever we say, it's our opinion. It does not represent the Cleveland Clinic. I'm Eduardo Mireles. I'm one of your hosts. Those are my conflicts of interest. And Rob Chatburn. Rob, say hi.
Oh.
And those are his conflicts of interest. And today, sharing the facilitation with us is Jorge Pedrosa Granada, who is our SEVA coordinator for Mexico. So Jorge, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for sharing this case. There's some ground rules for you to know. Just keep your microphone muted. If you want to interact, please unmute, and then you can ask, but we just don't want back noise in the background. And then the second is if you want to just put in the chat your comments or questions or answers as we're asking, as Jorge is facilitating, please do so. That works very well if you are microphone shy. There's CME for people that work at Cleveland Clinic, and there is CRCE for all respiratory therapists in the US. So if you are a respiratory therapist, do remember to fill in your evaluation 1 hour after completion of this event. And so we always start with a basic key knowledge. And what I want just to highlight for you is something, and I put it in Spanish here. And so for all of you that only speak English, then you get a little bit of Spanish lesson at the same time. So what we put here is the pressure from the ventilator and the pressure from the muscle. And there's a relationship between both of them based on the mode of mechanical ventilation that you're on. So here you have PMOS of 0, so meaning the patient is paralyzed, and all the way to alto, which means very high. So the most PMOS that you can generate. And then the same happens for the pressure from the ventilator. And you have here a relationship that it's very common that we call inverse relationships, meaning as the pressure from as the patient is doing more effort, the pressure from the ventilator goes down. And the classic interaction here is volume control, PRBC, and volume support. All of those modes decrease the amount of pressure delivered by the ventilator as the patient does more effort. And we have seen some cases in which actually the patient is doing so high effort that if you're on volume control, you may be actually fighting or doing work on the ventilator, which is not a fun event. Then you have in green, the second most common is where you set the pressure on the ventilator, and it doesn't matter what the patient does, the pressure that the ventilator delivers stays constant. And the two classic modes that achieve that is pressure control and pressure support in their commercial nomenclature. And then less available, but available nonetheless, is as the patient does more effort, the ventilator does more effort, delivers more pressure, and those are the modes that use servo targeting. And the two modes that do this in relationship to the intensity of the PMOS is PAV and NAVA. And so this is just to highlight this, but it's important for you to recognize that the amount of support that you get from the ventilator if you are in volume control is determined by the size of the tidal volume that you set there. On pressure control is by the amount of pressure that you set there. So the lower or higher, that's going to be the baseline that the patient will get. And in PAV is the proportionality. So if you set it lower, then this would, instead of looking at this level, it would look lower than that. Sorry. It would be, if you set a lower amount of support, it would look like this. And if you set higher, the proportionality would be more inclined. Rob, comments?
Yeah, just a historical note. The first time a graph like this appeared. It was back in the 1980s, I think, and it was made by Dr. Magni Yunus, who's also an engineer. He's the guy that invented PAV. And it has never really caught on until we started talking about it a lot.
Yeah, and I think that it helps you do decisions, especially when you're trying to come to terms with what your goal is mechanical ventilation. And I think that's where we're gonna end, and that this talks a little bit about that baseline level of support. I mean, where the minimum amount that you set on the ventilator is the minimum that the patient is gonna receive with each breath that they trigger, or if they're not triggering with what the ventilator is doing. So Jorge, this is your shot. Here goes your image, and if you want to start guiding us through the process, please do. Thank you very much for doing this, and you're muted right now. There you go.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Mexico. And this is a case from Mexico from the ventilators we use here. This is a Puritan Bennett 980. And, well, you see these curves and which is the tag? What is the tag that you already see here? Please write it down in the chat.
All right, you got a fair amount of PCCMBS, Jorge.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is a PCCMBS. You can see it in the lower corner. It says PC and assisted control in this ventilator. So yes, this is a PCCMBS. So what is the load? What is the inspiratory and the expiratory load in this graphic? Come on, don't be shy. There's some people from Mexico, so you can write it down in Spanish and I will translate it. So don't be shy.
You're starting to get some answers.
Yeah.
Are you able to see the chat, Jorge?
Yeah, I'm already
Excellent.
reading it. There's people telling that in inspiration we see PIMOS, and in expiration some say that it's elastic, some say it's also PIMOS. So why would you say that in the inspiratory phase we are seeing PIMOS? We can, well, I can't draw over it, but I'm pretty sure that Eduardo will do it.
Yeah.
So
Do you want me to draw through inspiration first,
yeah,
or
please. Yeah.
through
So yeah, there's PIMOS in the inspiration phase. Remember, this is pressure pressure controlled mode, so we should see the flow, and in flow we expect to see a decay, a triangle, very smooth, and as Eduardo has already draw over it, we see a curve over it, which is PIMOS. Certainly, no, we have PIMOS, and in the elastic, in the expiratory phase, some say it's expiratory, some say it's elastic, some say there's PIMOS, and also we would expect, well, maybe Eduardo can put numbers on each curve. We have 3 different breadths, and and we can see that the expiration phase is also not triangular. We have some upward especially in the number 2, yeah. We would expect also to be triangular, so also we can see some PIMOS, but also it looks like the expiration flow measures maybe 1.2, 1.5 at most seconds, so it would probably talk that it is also an elastic expiratory area. So which patient ventilator discordance can you see?
So just let me go back, Jorge, because I have a couple of comments. One is coming from Rob, Rob, that I think that it's important. And thank you, Angel Emilio, for talking about the exponential decay. Absolutely, that's the right way to describe this, is that exponential decay to 0. So great point there. The second one is the area under that we are drawing in between the flow waveform and what would be expected. And obviously, I'm drawing where I would expect it, right? That doesn't mean that it's the reality. It could be even worse than that. But in general terms, the load that you see here is the same manifestation, or the load. The load during expiration is the same during inspiration. So if the way that this decays is likely the way that it should decay in here. Not always, but it's a good rule of the thumb. So the area that goes above that is essentially the patient work of breathing manifested there. And so you can see it here and here. Rob, you put a comment there. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, you have drawn in some red shaded areas on the flow waveform.
Yes.
That shows the difference between a passive inflation and an
Yes.
active inflation caused by PMUS. So when you have an inspiratory PMUS, you get an increased inspiratory flow and an increased tidal volume above passive inflation. And that red area there is proportional to the extra work that the patient is doing. Or another way to think about it is the relationship between the red area and the black area is the proportional work done by the patient versus the proportional work done by the ventilator. You could think of it as sort of a visual work shifting index.
I love it, and actually they're calling it now. I mean, there's a software that they tried. There was a paper by Albani that's called flow index, and so they saw the curvature of that curve the same way that they would do a stress index, but they were looking at that. So how far away it was from that. Although they didn't do the exponential decay, they said a straight line, but it's about the same. All right, Jorge, all yours. Just wanted to highlight those couple of comments.
Yeah, also, well, okay. Yeah. So also, Rob asks a question. So how does this ventilator indicate patient versus machine trigger? And well, this ventilator doesn't show it like that in the like the new ones do, like Hamilton, like Servo. If you see in the upper left corner, there's an A, and in this case, it's not necessarily related to what we do in the usual tag, since it says it can say three different things. It gives a C when it is controlled, the trigger by the ventilator, an A when it is assisted, which means that the patient triggered the ventilator, and it gives in Spanish an E. I suppose that in English it was an S of spontaneous, but which it doesn't, I mean, assisted and spontaneous is triggered by the patient. However, spontaneous is triggered and cycled by the patient. But unfortunately, this is not related. It is happening. You should be watching the ventilator to see what's the curve and what the ventilator says, because this A doesn't relate to the curves we are seeing here, because I had to do a pause, a screenshot, I mean, and this A is the ventilator is still working behind the screenshot, so this A is not necessarily related. So if you will rely on that letter, you should be watching each one of the curves. So this A doesn't relate to what we are seeing in the screen.
Yeah, which adds a little bit higher level of complexity to try to know what type of trigger discordance is. But and that's one of the good things that some ventilators have implemented, which are the visual markers. Great point. Thank you, Rob, for highlighting that. Alrighty, so go ahead.
So which patient ventilatory discordance do you think we are seeing here? So please write down in the chat. So we have an early trigger.
And Arsal, you referred to the trigger. So we're on the trigger phase. So when you say normal trigger.
So you want me to explain, or what do
You can go at it. I mean, you unmuted, so release the beast.
No, I assumed that all of these were patient triggered, so that's why I called them normal, but could be wrong.
Why do you hesitate?
It's difficult to say whether it is just machine triggered or patient triggered here, but I don't see any flow or pressure deflection before it starts. So maybe these are all machine triggered. Maybe that could make it early trigger. So not sure.
All right, Jorge.
So well, I will give you some insight. There were when we were watching this curve, all three breaths had a C on it. So all those were ventilator triggered breaths. No patient triggered ventilations. The air there is away from the screenshot.
Yeah, so what you're telling us is the machine was reading breath 1, 2, and 3 with a C, which would tell us that these were by the machine, which is the one that knows the truth, triggered by the machine, not by the patient, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, and Rob is saying that's called time triggered. And then you're getting a slew of early triggers on your.
So why would you say that it is an early trigger if the people that is saying that early trigger is the PVI? And yes, we agree that we don't see any inspiratory effort, any patient trigger, not in flow or in pressure curves.
Very good. So why don't you walk us? Why is this an early trigger, Jorge?
Yeah, well, all three ventilations are triggered by the ventilator, or all three breaths, sorry. And if you see, there's in the peak expiratory flow is not very triangular. Maybe in the first breath it is, but if you see breath number 2 and breath number 3, all the expiratory flow is chopped. There's no triangle, the usual triangle you expect to see. So it means that we are having there some PIMAs. So also you can watch sometimes what we should try to see is where the inspiratory effort begins. And in breath number 1, you see that's the ventilator, but looks like in the place where the triangle becomes a curve, there's where the inspiration, where the patient muscular effort starts, and it goes way down, maybe a little to the place where the flow ends, but it is very, 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 very easily seen in breath number 2. In breath number 2, the inspiration. Sorry,
I'm erasing so that I can paint it better.
Yeah.
My bad. That's an Eduardo issue, not a there you go. Let me paint what you're saying, Jorge, so everybody can see it. But this is I love what you're doing, Jorge, because you're the key part is to understand where PMOS starts. So this one started here and probably ended up right there, correct? This one, you said it starts over here. Sorry, over here. The PMOS starts over here, and then it finishes over here. Yes? And then the last one, it starts here, and it ends all the way over here. You agree with that?
Yeah. So we are seeing an early trigger, and also that early trigger is associated to an early cycle. But we should always focus on the first discordance we see. So that's as Ariel is already saying in the chat, in breath number 3, the inspiratory effort of the patient is causing a double trigger.
Yeah, this is I love this image that you sent, Jorge, because it shows a couple of things. I think one of them is that the timing for an early trigger, you can see on this one, it almost started immediately after the breath. And the second one, a little bit later, and it caused a little bit of the formulas that you would say it's an early cycle. And then in the third one, it was even later, boom, it triggered another one. So there's all this, and the literature is filled with different phenotypes, but you can see that if you were at the bedside, if you see the last breath, you would say, well, that's a early trigger with double trigger. If you see the first one, you would say that's an early trigger that started at the beginning of the breath. So it's sometimes these things are not as pretty as the articles show. All right, Jorge. So what happened here? Where do you want to take us now?
Well, in this moment, we should think of what would you do to try to revert this situation, to treat the early trigger. Why do you think that is important in this case? What do you people think?
Oh, look at that. They're attacking you. A really high quality statement from Angel.
Okay, so what is the goal? I would say that just for the sake of exercise, let's think that the goal is safety. Let's start with safety. This patient is in safety. What would you do to try to revert this early trigger? We will, if we have time, we might go to. So some people see sedate. Okay, to lower respiratory rate, mandatory respiratory rate, which in this case is 15. What else?
I put it in Spanish, so FR is frecuencia respiratoria, in English, respiratory rate. So you're getting Spanglish class number 2.
Sorry.
Very good. right?
So, okay. What would you do if the goal is comfort?
And I just want to say, as you guys write, that usually on safety as a goal, we still drop the frequency first. That's our first item, and then we think about sedation as ourselves highlighted there. Alrighty, go for it. Comfort. You have. Okay.
Okay. And in case of liberation?
So while they write down the goal, so just remember comfort, decrease the frequencies. Again, it falls into the same one. And Ariel made a case for PCCSBS as a potential, recognizing that some patients may go apneic when we do this, but just be aware.
And also for the sake of ventilators, this is one of the last ventilators in which we can use PCCSVR, because we can use this ventilator has PAV as a modality.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a suggestion of PCCMVA, which is, I think they call it volume support on this ventilator. Or
CSBA, sorry.
CMV. Yeah, it was CSV. Well, if it was CMVA, that means you have adaptive targeting for mandatory breaths. And if that was for comfort, that might be not the best idea. Why is that?
If it was CMBA, Rob?
Yeah. Given what this patient's doing.
So just to rephrase for the people online, well, they just Alicia just said got your question, Rob, which is the workup reading is high and the drive is high. She's saying.
Right. So CMVA is like PRVC, right? Mm-hmm. So the ventilator, it's a pressure control mode with a target tidal volume, and the ventilator sees that the volume is going up because the patient's making efforts, so it drops its support. And then the patient sucks in harder, and the ventilator drops more support. So if you're trying to wean the patient and he can handle it, maybe that's okay. But if the goal is comfort, all you're doing is making the patient work harder and harder. So really,
I would also want to highlight something, Rob. I think, and I love so now you're talking about the drive, right? How much PMOS is the patient doing? Mm-hmm. Which can help us kind of come to terms. Is that right, Rob?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of them. And the second part, I also think that if your goal is liberation, and sometimes for whatever reason, when we think of the patient on the ventilator, the ultimate goal is always to get them off. So if the patient if you drop the rate and the patient is triggering on its own, and it has enough drive, and we can, there's ways to measure it, then perhaps the way is to do an spontaneous breathing trial, or if the patient has trach, then just disconnect them and see how they're doing, or drop the support, and if you want to keep monitoring. So, Jorge, are you still with us?
Yeah.
Oh, I lost your camera. So I know that you measured effort on this patient. So do you want to talk a little bit about this graph over here? Maybe take us through that. There's a lot of nuances on this graph, so I know that you can take us through those nuances, and then what does it mean?
Well, this ventilator. If you want to measure respiratory drive and respiratory effort, we can measure PO1 for respiratory drive. If you see, there's a folder in it, and to measure POC, I mean, we have to use the NIF, the negative inspiratory, I don't remember the F,
Force,
in
force.
English, the force, the negative, but in this case, you measure it without warning the patient. So the patient must be passive. He should not do a conscient effort. So in this case, we measured POC, and as you can see, we have in this graph 3 different efforts, and in negative efforts, but the result that is shown a little at the right, you can see that it shows that it is minus 22 centimeters of water. However, this number is related to the third, to the last effort. The best way to measure it is to do an expiratory pause in the patient. The patient must not be warned, so he does the effort automatically, and we measure only the first one. So the pause must have been ended at the end of the first effort. Since and it's a little higher. I mean, what happens in here is that if we do the expiratory pause very long, the patient will be increasingly doing more effort each one of the efforts, so that this minus 22 is way lower than the first one. So we can probably measure it in the graph. If you see, we have 6 pip, which means that our start in the little yellow line is 6, and in here must be like 14 maybe. So it goes from 6 to minus 14, so it is maybe 20. So this 20 is the one that we should focus on, it not the minus 22. So what it means is that the POC in this case is minus 20, which is higher, which means that the patient has high drive. So, high respiratory effort. So it is very important because according to our goal, what we want to do to correct the ventilatory, the patient ventilator interaction should be focused in the goal, and the goal in this case might be affected because the patient has high respiratory effort and high respiratory PO1. We don't show it in here, but yeah, the patient has PO1 high. So that's what will make us choose the best mode. And yeah, we will have, like, I agree with you, Ariel. It would have been nice to have all the measurements.
Well, in general terms, I think an important thing here, Jorge, is, well, what do I do with this value? And physicians usually, well, and clinicians in general, tend to focus too much on the value itself rather than on the context of the patient. And in the context of the patient, at least part of it is telling you if this patient is generating a fair amount of effort while taking a breath. And why don't you just walk me a little bit? I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios, and perhaps this will be instructional for the team, because these numbers may be completely normal and you will ignore them. I mean, we have ignored them for decades. I'm not saying that that's normal, but it's important to know what are the potential causes for them. I'm not saying that this is the case on this one. So I'm going to go to the next screen so that we have space to do that. And I'm going to draw a little graph for you, and then you can guide us through that. So you have the point P01, right? And you have your POC.
POC.
And then there's 3 potential combinations here that I'm going to highlight. So you have a PO1 that's elevated and a POC that's elevated, a PO1 that's low, and a PO1 that's low and a POC that's low, and a PO1 that it's elevated and a POC that's low. So walk me through the causes for PO1 high and POC high.
Yeah, when we have respiratory drive and respiratory effort high, both, we can think that what we have is problems with respiration, with metabolic and respiration problems, especially when we are talking about metabolic problems. We especially we think in acidosis. When we have respiratory problems, it's because we can have hypocarbia. I mean, well, low CO2, and also we can have central problems which meaning anxiety, pain, cerebral injury, and the final one is under resistance. When we have both low, we have the opposite, metabolic alkalosis. We have a lot of sedation, lot of intoxication, toxicity with opiates, for example, and over resistance. And the final one, which is a high respiratory drive, but with low respiratory effort. It's usually neuromuscular disease and also very, very severe obstructive lung disease. And so those are the etiology in which we think when we have these problems.
Yeah, I love. Thank you for walking us through this, Roberto.
Yeah, I wanted to point out something that Jorge said on the last slide. On that particular ventilator, you're getting the POC by looking at the lowest negative pressure, which is under the NIF column apparently. But he said you have to subtract the peak. So it's the delta, it's the difference between the highest and the lowest pressures. It's not the NIF, because NIF is defined as the single lowest negative pressure. So that's an error that people can make if they don't understand how this ventilator is working.
Yeah, so it's how much you would fall if you were to fall from the baseline all the way down. It would be, oh!
Yeah, that's POC, that's not NIF.
Yes, excellent. I think that this is a great way to finish. This is a key set of measurements to do. We recognize today early trigger. We recognize how you choose this for the goals. What did you learn with this? What do you want the team to get to take home, Jorge? What's your you learned something from this case? What do you want people to take home?
Well, I think that we in this kind of patients, we should always focus on the goal we have in ventilation, and also, if possible, we should try to measure what's the respiratory drive and effort. Also, as Ariel says in his last chat message, we should use a lot of clinical decisions, not only watching the curves, because if the patient has a lot of sedation or has neuromuscular disease, it might help us to take decisions according to the goal. So I think that that's what I would take home.
I love it. Jorge, I want to thank you for being so engaged and driving the program too, for your conclusions on this beautiful case. And 3, invite everybody to continue to come here every second and fourth week Tuesday at 2 p.m. We'll have these moments for all of us to learn. If there's not one of them, and we have done now close to 200 of these sessions. There's 107 in YouTube. You're invited to collaborate. Send us your images, and obviously we're here to learn. So Jorge, thank you, Roberto, and thank you everybody for attending today.